Hi there, it's Mr. Adams here, a mathematics teacher with over 20 years of experience. In my last video, I looked at the graphical evidence that showed that the 50% discount didn't cause house prices to rise. In this video, I want to explain with calculations that backs up that case. Before we begin, we need to understand what capital gains tax actually is. So when you buy an investment, the increase in value is called the capital gain. Now, tax is paid at your income tax rate minus any discounts. Now, in this video, if I refer to the CGT, I'm referring to the capital gains tax. Prior to September 1985, there was no capital gains tax on investment property. Then from September 1985, they brought in this inflation-related capital gains. So if your investment property increased above the rate of inflation, that part was taxed. And then from September 1999, 50% of the total gain was taxed. Now that's often referred to as a 50% discount. If you bought a property prior to 1985 for, let's say, $50,000 and then you sell it a year later for $60,000, the capital gain there is $10,000. But because there's no capital gains tax at this time, obviously you'd pay zero. Let's say you buy an investment property in 1990 for $100,000 and you sell it a year later for $110,000 and the inflation rate is 7%. So the capital gain here is still $10,000. The capital gain discount is going to be 7% of that $10,000. So a discount of $7,000. So you're only going to pay capital gains tax on that $3,000. So, and if you got a wage of 30% taxable income, then you would end up paying $900 in tax. This time we're going to buy an investment property in 2005. We're going to do that for $200,000 and then sell it a year later for $210,000. So the capital gain here is $10,000. The capital gains discount is going to be 50% of that $10,000. So in other words, $5,000. Your taxable gain is $5,000. So 30% of that $5,000 is $1,500. It's definitely not going to be the first option where we had no capital gains tax. It's going to be option 2 or option 3. So it's either going to be the inflation-based one or the 50% one. And that will depend on the presumptions that we have. Let's look at an example where house prices move at the same rate as inflation. In this case, the inflation capital gains works out to be zero because it's going at the same rate of inflation. The 50% capital gains is going to be 50% of the increase, which works out to be $250,000. And then you've got to pay tax on that. So that 50% discount system works out to be $75,000 worse in this example. Let's change the situation so that house prices are increasing at double the rate of inflation. In this case, the inflation capital gains is going to be $500,000. The 50% capital gains is also going to be $500,000. So there is actually no difference. So this is the point where inflation capital gains and the 50% model work out to be exactly the same. Let's change it to triple the rate of inflation. So inflation capital gains here is going to be $1 million. Now the 50% capital gains works out to be $750,000. So in this case, the 50% discount is going to be better by about $75,000. Economists correctly argue that since the 50% discount has brought in, it has brought in less tax than what would have happened under the inflation-based system. But this is not the full story. This table will help to explain why this tax change was so minimal. So imagine that you earn 30% with your regular income. Well, with the 50% capital gains tax, you are always going to pay like half of that. So in other words, 15%. But if it's inflation adjusted, well, if the house prices are moving at the same rate of inflation, you pay 0% tax. If it's double the rate of inflation, it's 15%. But even if it's moving at triple the rate of inflation, well, you still have an effective tax rate of 20%. So even if house prices grew at triple the rate of inflation, the tax would have only been 20% when it came to that inflation adjusted one. So this is only like a 5% difference from the 50% discount. So if we go back to example 3, that is the difference between a $1.2 million return and a $1.275 million return. It's not a great deal when you're talking about numbers that big. So even in these extremely investor positive circumstances, it is unlikely to have affected investor behaviour. If we go back to house prices going at the same rate of inflation, well, that's 0% tax under that system. But under the 50% discount, you are still effectively paying a 50% tax. Now, this is more significant because it means that you're actually paying tax on a property that is realistically not going up in value. So when we changed capital gains tax system, there was minimal positive change when the conditions were good, but there's also significant downside when conditions are bad. So if an investor saw this as a positive change, then they didn't really fully understand the ramifications. There is some credence to this argument because since 1999, inflation has been 2.9% and house price growth has been 6.4% per year. That is more than double, 2.2 times to be more precise. Now, under the 50% discount system, your effective tax rate would be 15%. That's if your income tax rate was 30%. But under the inflation system, it would work out to be 16.5%. So we're comparing 15% tax with 16.5% tax. That's hardly any difference at all. What I did here is I had real house price data and I took away inflation. And so what it allowed me to do is year by year see which system would have been better than the other one. So to simplify it down, the bars above the line, that's where the 50% capital gains tax is more beneficial. The ones below the line are where the inflation-based capital gains tax is more beneficial. If we pick a year like 2004 and look at how many times that the house price growth rate has been more than double the rate of inflation, it has occurred 9 times versus 11 times that it hasn't. Now, when we have a look at the aggregate effect of that, we find that there's been no difference between the inflation-based capital gains tax and the 50% capital gains tax since 2004. But I want to be really cautious here. Although I've argued that there hasn't been much difference between the two capital gains tax, a move back to the inflation-based capital gains tax would actually be sheer stupidity. Historically, since 1999, things have been quite unique. Inflation has been incredibly low. House price growth has been incredibly strong. Historically, this is the exception, not the rule. It is more likely that over the next 20 years, we'll see house price growth at less than double the rate of inflation. Compared to the inflation-based capital gains tax, the 50% discount has minimal upside even when house prices are rising quickly, but it has significant downside when inflation rises or house price growth slows, or even worse, when both things happen at the same time. Just a final thought, we wouldn't be having this debate if the 50% discount was implemented a few years later. It was implemented at a time when the house prices were already growing at 10% and was then supercharged by the first home buyers grant. The 50% discount is blamed for what it didn't cause and what it actually can't cause. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe and hit the like button. Please leave a review and a comment. Not a financial advisor, I'm a mathematics teacher with a passion for teaching financial literacy. Please read the disclaimer.